The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Amid sky-high housing costs, inflation, and a pandemic, poverty for some in Ontario can be just one missed paycheck away. Tonight, how people in smaller and rural communities in the province keep the wolf from the door. Then, some lessons from Fort Frances, the first municipality in Ontario to ban single-use plastics. It's Thursday, February 10th, and that's tonight on The Agenda. Last year, Ontario food banks saw a 12% jump in visits over the previous year, that according to Feed Ontario's 2021 report. They were young people, seniors, people with jobs. In rural Ontario, such supports can be even harder to find. That definitely doesn't mean the needs aren't there. With us to better understand poverty in smaller communities in Ontario, we're joined from Mount Pearl, Newfoundland, by former Brockville City Councillor Lee Bursey, who's an anti-poverty activist and co-founder of Brockville Street Friends. In Dryden, in northwestern Ontario, Henry Wall, Chief Administrative Officer of the Kenora District Services Board, and in Chatham, Ontario, Polly Smith, Director of Employment and Social Services for the municipality of Chatham-Kent. And we're delighted to welcome all of you onto our program tonight to shine a light on something that definitely needs a lot more illumination. And just before we start our conversation, I'm going to ask our director, Sheldon Osmond, to bring up a graphic here, and we'll just go through some numbers so everybody's got the background on this. And I'll go into some detail here for those who are listening on podcast and can't see these numbers. This is the percentage of Canadians living below the official poverty line. That's an income of about $63,000, just under, for a family of four in 2019, or $18,000 as an individual. And Canada, in the year 2015, 14.5% were considered living below the poverty line. In 2019, that number dropped to 10.1%. That's a drop of more than 1.3 million people. Now, numbers specific to the province of Ontario. In 2015, 15.1% of Ontarians were living below the poverty line. If we fast forward 4 years to 2019, that number drops to 10.9%. That's a drop of almost 500,000 people. It is, of course, still worth noting that roughly 1 in 10 people, that's 3.7 million people, live in poverty, according to 2019 numbers. And of course, all these numbers predate the pandemic, so let's keep that in mind. Now, Polly, math is not exactly my strong suit, but it seems like those numbers are going in the right direction, and that feels like unambiguously good news. Is it?
Thanks, Steve. I think it was good news. The problem, and may have had a lot to do with the federal funding for children, the National Child Benefit, and those sorts of benefits that have made a big difference to families. But with the pandemic and the increased housing costs, particularly in rural Ontario, the changes of housing has increased exponentially, that I think those numbers are no longer true. And people are facing, more people are facing poverty again, and some people are falling into deeper poverty now.
Henry, what's the story in your neck of the woods?
I'd say something very similar. Before the pandemic, and we have to remember too that we've always had a high rate of poverty. You know, before the pandemic, about 1 in 3 children or families were living in poverty in the district of Kenora, and that seems like hasn't changed much. In fact, that we are seeing actually an intensification, and we think it's because of the cost of housing, and also very high population growth as well in some of our communities. And so when you combine those things, we're finding that more and more families are sharing a housing unit, and it's the cost of living is intensifying. And so all those things are actually, you know, when we look at it from a health standpoint, but also from a food bank usage, we're seeing some concerning numbers.
And Lee, from your perch in Eastern Ontario, did you see the numbers coming down before the pandemic hit, and has it changed since the pandemic hit?
I think it's important to keep in context. Of course, they're going to come down when you see a raising minimum wage, when you see universal child benefits, you see anti-poverty national strategies, as well as national housing strategies being enacted by proactive governments, and that includes provincial and federal partnerships. That said, I mean, no doubt about it, it may have only been a snapshot for, because of course the market will bear what the market will bear, and it becomes a scenario where the more people or the more equity people have to work with, of course, the higher the cost of living. And I know that a shortage of housing in my neck of the woods, or my previous neck of the woods, was something that was outlined as a key focus and priority area of concern. And no doubt at this time we see skyrocketing housing costs across the board in Ontario, and I think that that's plunging more people into poverty, or more people into precarious housing scenarios, than probably any time I can remember.
Let me just see if that's the case in southwestern Ontario, because certainly in the big cities you hear about skyrocketing housing prices, and even in mid-sized cities. Polly, is housing and the affordability of housing a huge issue in southwestern Ontario?
It is a huge issue. We've had a tremendous growth, which is, good news in so many regards. But at the same time, the cost of housing and of houses in our community has doubled in recent years. And we also have lower than average than the provincial average in wages. So the impact on families being able to get into the market is very much a challenge. But the other impact is, of course, on rentals. So a lot of being in growth mode, a lot of things are selling at very high prices, and rent prices have increased exponentially as well, which has led to a whole host of issues with evictions and people that were in affordable housing that can't find affordable housing again once they're evicted, and evicted many, many times through no fault of their own. A move, a renovation happening, whatever.
Henry, you used an expression in your first answer that I just wanted to follow up on. You talked about an intensification of poverty, and I wonder if you could just explain to us what that looks like.
Yeah. So, with the high cost of construction in the north, our shorter building season, and what we've seen over the last 7-8 years is a significant increase in number of families and households that are with the District Services Board just on the wait list for affordable housing. When I started with the District Services Board back in 2014, we had just under 400 households on the wait list for housing. Fast forward now, just in the midst of the pandemic, we have over 1,800 families and households waiting for housing. And so we're seeing that the ability to afford and attain housing is becoming more and more difficult for families. The cost of construction is quite significant. And so that just amplifies. One, we have a high growth rate in terms of population. The stock isn't keeping up. And we also remember a vast district that had a significant housing crisis, in particular in our First Nation communities, that is putting a lot of pressure on urban centers where families are looking to move to be closer to services, access education and health. And then with the cost of construction, it really has created an environment where we're seeing housing prices rise significantly, especially for small rural communities, including rents. And that's displacing more and more families who were already at the margins.
That's a story you hear about all the time south of the French River, but we don't hear it so much north of the French River, and it's interesting that it is just as bad up where you are as down where we are. Now, Lee, I'm going to set up this next question delicately, because I don't normally like to ask people overly personal questions, but you have been rather public about what's happened to you in the last year or so. Let's remind everybody, you were a city councillor in Brockville. There are not too many politicians, or even former politicians, who find themselves homeless. What happened to you?
Well, that wasn't recent. To be clear, growing up in my adolescence, I found myself in an unfortunate circumstance that was, probably, I guess, probably not as uncommon as a lot of people would anticipate. It was a domestic circumstance that saw my mother and I living in a tent. And I know that there are many people in my demographic and some former classmates and colleagues of mine who faced similar or sometimes even more challenging precarious housing situations. And there's a circumstance that's not based on societal ill. That's a circumstance that was not necessarily based on a substance use disorder or justice involvement. It could happen to anyone. And there are other people who I'm working with, who I'm close with, who I interact with, who are colleagues of mine and people who advocate in this issue, who quite frankly, are coming at this from all different levels. And as someone who works in the front line currently in homeless shelters and street outreach and a variety of different areas where basically I support containment facilities for functional tragedy, you can imagine that the reasons why people end up on the streets, or the reason why people end up in dire straits of either chronic or episodic homelessness, or housing precariousness, or just cyclical poverty, can be vast. And not all are substance use disorders. Not all are justice involvement, whether that be direct or indirect. Sometimes it's as simple as people have a willingness to go out and find an affordable place to live, but there's a vast shortage of them. And anyone who has had justice involvement is facing a brand new, significant barrier towards their own prosperity and success. And this, this tumbling weed keeps turning, and it blossoms into another significant factor, which is now what we're seeing, as was alluded to by other panelists here, is with the intensification piece, rent eviction is a legitimacy. And specifically during a pandemic, you can imagine that there's an added onus. You have a number of people now who may be succumbing to some of their personal shortcomings because of a lack of in-person supports or a lack of consistent supports. And on top of that, some are facing economic turmoil and poverty that for reasons that, are sometimes difficult to mitigate when we're talking about a pandemic. And all of those reasons can, of course, blossom and balloon into this tree of woe for so many families and so many people across Ontario. And no doubt, when you have a rising house cost, you have a rising fuel cost, a rising consumer home ownership cost, right? A rising rental facility cost, a rising cost of living for goods and services and food. You can imagine that you put all of these issues together, all the way down to a rising cost of education, and you have realized that it's harder than ever for some people to be able to lift themselves out of poverty, and the bootstraps mentality that we've attached ourselves to is just no longer accurate.
Well, let's go to southwestern Ontario again. And Polly, we want to give our viewers a snapshot of what life in Chatham-Kent is like by the numbers. So again, Sheldon, if you would, let's bring this up. The median income, and again, these numbers go back a few years, in Chatham-Kent, a little over $50,000 a year. That is less than the provincial median, which is about $5,000 higher. That gets you an unemployment rate of 7.4%, generally speaking, 11% for youth unemployment rate. And let's just continue a few more here. More than 16% of young people in the Chatham-Kent area don't graduate from high school. And the median income for an individual without high school in Chatham-Kent is $10,000. And homelessness since 2018 has increased by 144%. Okay, you can tell some of the stories with numbers, but the numbers don't tell the whole story. Polly, what story is not being told in those numbers?
I think really the story is it's that poverty and homelessness is not all about choices. It's a lot about luck, the times that you're living in, the market, where you are living. Certainly in our community, a lot of people have found, they have slipped into poverty, or people that weren't really living in poverty are now, even though they had low incomes, because their costs were low, are now experiencing poverty. But when I think about my parents, who both grew up in poverty, they were able to escape poverty because they were born in the late 30s. After the war, things started to look up and opportunities presented themselves. And so they lived a life and gave me a better life than they could ever have imagined, truthfully.
Where were they from originally?
My mother was originally from here. My father immigrated from Belgium.
Okay.
So after the war, right, and with everything that was happening, and they were able to really, that's where that whole bootstrap mentality, I think, comes from. But the opportunities were there. And then I look at my son, for example, who's in his 20s, and him and his girlfriend, they want to have a house, and but they're struggling to get the wages that they would need to get into the market and pay rent. And they're okay, and they're doing well. They're okay, but they're not going to move ahead of, my generation easily. And if you have other things go wrong, if you don't have those family supports, as was mentioned, things can go south really fast. And if the services and supports you need are not in the community, which often happens in rural Ontario, you're behind the eight ball, essentially.
Right. Henry, I know when I've asked this question to other people in bigger cities, they can find alternatives when housing disappears on them, right? They can couch surf, they go stay with friends, they can find other family members. If you live in a city of 2.5 million people, chances are you may know some other people. When you live in a city of a few thousand people and you become homeless all of a sudden, what do you do?
Exactly, and that's a big challenge. Where how do you connect to services and supports, especially if you're in a community that is hundreds of kilometers away from a larger urban centers where some of those supports might be. And so what we're actually seeing is we're seeing a significant number of our community members actually being displaced, who are falling into homelessness. And an example of what we're hearing is that in terms of youth homelessness in Winnipeg, that it's estimated that a number of the youth that are homeless in Winnipeg are actually from northwestern Ontario. And so it's really the lack of options, especially around housing. With respect to seniors who may not have options to either downsize or afford their current housing situation, that the option is to move rather than to be able to find alternatives in a community. And very similar to young families and young professionals starting out. I consider myself still a bit of an import to Northern Ontario, having moved up from Mexico to Southern Ontario, then up here. 15 years ago, affordable housing, we were talking low-income families, low-income households. But I think that conversation now has changed to nurses, police officers, teachers who cannot afford to access housing or even have access to that housing.
One of the expressions we hear a lot is, and you hear this both about Northern Ontario and rural Ontario, is that some of its best exports are young people. I mean, you hear that about Northern Ontario quite a bit, Henry. Are you finding that to be the case?
I think when you look at the issue, it's twofold. We are seeing a number of young people, especially who have attained an education, not returning to our communities, but also we're seeing a significant amount of young people that are not graduating. And I think that's in part where, for many reasons, many factors and challenges that our young people face, and even simply to attain a high school education, where many have to leave their community, their families, in order to relocate to another community, could be hundreds of kilometers away, to simply attain a high school education, which can be a really daunting journey. And so when we look at just the number of young people that we have in our communities and the ability to grow our own talent and so forth becomes a bit more challenging, especially when we're lacking basic infrastructure like reliable internet, being able to participate in the virtual world. And we saw that a huge challenge through this pandemic, where many of our young people weren't being able to be in class because they lacked access to reliable internet.
Paulie, how about in southwestern Ontario? Young people as exports?
I think for many years that was the case. I think the tide's turning on that now. There are opportunities in Chatham-Kent that people are gravitating to. Many did leave for post-secondary. Many are coming back to Chatham-Kent for job opportunities and housing. Housing is being built and is still lower cost than some of the biggest centers.
Oh, that's good to hear. Okay. Lee, I want to get you back in here on the issue of Brockville Street Friends. You set that up. You and others have set that up to deal with some of the issues we've been talking about tonight. What do you guys do?
Well, I have to first make a big shout out and a lot of love to Mark Dara, who was the co-founder with me, my best friend, and also someone who's incredibly outspoken and has embraced this issue. I had a personal attachment and affinity, and as a public figure, it was one of those cases where people would message me and be like, Lee, you're involved in housing and homelessness advocacy. We've got a young man we found sleeping under a canopy of some kind or under a tree in a parking lot. Would you be willing to assist? Where do I send them? How do I access a service? What do they need? How can I help? And what we've quickly found out was that people very much want to help but don't always know how. So it became a scenario of marching out into the woods and collecting whatever goods and services we could accumulate and making sure we had a list of contacts and a list of agencies where people could access a free meal or access some low cost.
And is it working, Lee? Are you having an impact?
I think so. Now, I'm trying to duplicate that here. Mount Pearl, as an example, is very much a similar demographic, but we are also attached to an urban center in a way that Brockville isn't. But it became a scenario where what started out as something so small and a few friendship kits turned into this blossoming, a volunteer effort community-wide, and our houses looking like thrift stores.
That sounds really good to hear. Let me follow up with
Yeah,
Henry on
sure.
this aspect of it. Henry, I know it's the case in a big city, for example, that if you get into trouble, there's a kind of anonymity a lot of the time when you live in a big city. Because there's just so many people here, you can't know that many people. But in smaller towns, there is this expression that everybody knows everybody and everybody knows everybody's business. So is it harder to be in trouble in a smaller place?
There's a lot of misunderstanding, and I think stereotypes that come with homelessness and experiencing homelessness. And what we've been seeing over the years in our communities is that people are really in a desperate need and desperate crisis before they feel comfortable or just before they reach out. And I think more so in smaller communities where, if you're struggling with mental health or an addiction, it's not easy to reach out for help because there's so much stigma still in our collective societies around those issues. But then you also have the challenge around just lacking basic infrastructure. Not all of our communities have even emergency shelter where you can turn to be safe. I want to share this. This is now a couple of years ago in partnership with our school boards in the city of Dryden. Youth were surveyed in terms of what was the most important piece to them. We had a number of questions, and we really want to know in terms of what was important to our youth, what could we do as community agencies to make life better for them. And the number one response that came back from the youth, this is over 300 youth, was that they would like to see a safe place in the community where they weren't offered substance.
Polly, can you add to that?
I would agree with all of everything that Henry said. It's very much the same here in the Southwest, and there are limited services and limited opportunities for help, and some of those were exacerbated by the pandemic, as were people's ability to be well. And these kinds of family breakdowns and this lack of connection to community can sometimes lead to that, and it does happen in small towns as well as the big cities, and has a tremendous impact on homelessness particularly.
Henry, I want to go back to you here because when our producer Sandra Jonas invited you to be on this program, apparently you said to her, the emergency room is a great place to study poverty. Now that's something that a lot of people, I suspect, watching or listening to this, they would not have made that connection. What did you mean by that?
Yeah. And we also delivered the EMS land ambulance service across the district of Kenora. And by that, we just have to kind of look at our call volume and the types of calls that we're getting to really get a sense in terms of what is happening in people's homes. And what I meant by that is that, if we look at just before the pandemic started to just now, and we kind of look at in terms of which segment of our communities, which segment of our population by demographic is ending up in the back of an ambulance in an emergency medical situation. In our communities, the two demographics that are really standing out right now that are between the ages of 31 to 40. We've seen a 39% increase in call volumes related to that age group. Next, our children, 0 to 10 years old, a 36% increase in call volume for that demographic. And so you start to get a sense in terms of we have parent age individuals struggling, and we have children. And so there's starting to be some connections that we're looking to saying, what is the correlation? And really, when we look at determinants of health, poverty's in there. When families are not doing well, they cannot make ends meet. It plays an impact to how well people are doing on their health, what their actions and so forth. And many times when they're in a desperate crisis, they end up in ER, especially our young people.
We've got just a few minutes left here, so if I can, let me get crisp answers from all of you as we go one more go-round here. And that is, the minimum wage has been raised in the province of Ontario. We know about the federal government's child benefit programs, which have improved people's lives to a huge extent. And yet, there is this expression, the poor are still among us. Lee, I guess I wonder, Why does poverty so persist in spite of the best efforts by so many people, both in government, in the private sector, in the voluntary sector? Why does it still persist?
I'll be the first one to lift up, the current Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing and the current provincial government, just as I would the previous administration who put the Ontario, Poverty Prevention Act in place. The fact is that you're pushing a snowball up a hill at this moment when it comes to this issue, because it's something that had been neglected by previous generations for such a amount of time. The federal housing infrastructure had been eroded significantly during the 1990s, and anything that we're doing at this point is not just patchwork, but it's also piecemeal when you consider the fact that we're already 10 to 20 to 15 years behind the gamut. I can buy a home, as I have here in my community, for significantly less than I could from another community that I was proud to call home for so long. And I am one of those twilight of my youth folks who became an export to a different community to access the appropriate services and family supports, and also a better paying job and an opportunity.
Okay, but hang on. Lee, a lot of people are going to say you moved 2,000 miles away in order to have the kind of life that you have right now. That's not something that a lot of people want to do.
No, and it's not something that a lot of people can do.
Right.
So the fact is I've met so many incredible people working frontline in homelessness who are just one great opportunity away from significant success, but are also so many times the folks who are on the edge of the cusp of this issue are only one paycheck from falling through the cracks as well. So, in all intents and purposes, it becomes a scenario where every effort that's being made is genuine, and no doubt all governments are attaching themselves to this issue because it's harder to ignore in a time of isolation and when we're talking about making sure that people are isolating in place and making safe decisions for everyone's collective health. It's very difficult to ignore a segment of the population that we would have generally brushed off as having to lift themselves out of poverty and pull up their bootstraps. We recognize there's a collective health impact to ignoring this issue in times
Lee,
now.
you're going to forgive me. I'm going to jump in because I want to say,
Sure.
I'm going to make sure we save enough time for the other two guys, and I want to hear them on
Sure.
this as well. Paulie, this expression, the poor will always be among us. I mean, you're in the business of trying to improve people's lives. Do you believe that expression?
I don't believe it has to be so. I think we can make a huge difference by increasing the minimum wage, increasing social assistance rates. Neither have kept up with inflation over the past many years, and policies to slow the costs of housing and rentals. There's opportunities to even the playing field a little bit.
And what's a living wage, I guess, in your neck of the woods?
The information that we have in Chatham-Kent's a bit outdated. It's about the $16, $17 amount range. That's before the pandemic and so on. I would suggest it's probably around the $18 an hour wage, and that would be a very, a getting by wage.
That $18 is a getting by wage, and we're not there yet.
No.
Now, okay, Henry, how about in Northwestern Ontario? Are the poor always going to be among us?
It doesn't have to be so, and I think unless some things change, it might be so. A lot of good work is being done by all levels of government. I do think we need to be rethinking poverty reduction programs, like especially social assistance, so that we don't park people in poverty. I think the other piece is we need to double down on the creation of homes. This is infrastructure, housing, and I think the last piece is that we need to be very intentional about how we get people out of poverty, and I think having specific strategies for marginalized in terms of Indigenous people, Black youth. And so I think we need to be specific rather than be too general. I think
I got to know what that means. In my last 30 seconds, you say we got to be strategically specific. What does that mean?
Yeah. And in our region, for example, why is it that Indigenous youth are 3 times more likely to end up in the back of an ambulance? So I think from that standpoint, we need to be very specific in terms of does race play into poverty? Does it play into the overrepresentation of people in the justice system? And how do we address that rather than be too general? And I think we find that it does play a role.
Henry Wall from Kenora, Paulie Smith from Chatham-Kent, Lee Bursey, who's in Newfoundland, but helped start the Brockville Street Friends. Really glad all of you could share your experiences with us tonight here on TVO. Many thanks.
Thank you very much.
If you want a plastic straw or bag in the northwestern Ontario city of Fort Frances, you're out of luck. They were the first municipality in the province to ban single-use plastics. A similar ban is coming in 2022 across the country. With us now for how to make it work in Fort Frances, Municipal Councillor Douglas Judson. In Orangeville, Ontario, Joanne St. Godard, Executive Director of the Circular Innovation Council, and in the provincial capital, Karen Wersig, Plastics Program Manager at Environmental Defense. Hi to you all.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Well, to get us started, let's take a look at what single plastics we're talking about. In November, the federal government released draft regulations to ban 6 kinds of single-use plastics, and this is to take effect across the country in late 2022. They include plastic checkout bags, cutlery and straws, food serviceware made from or containing problematic plastics, ring carriers, and stir sticks. I want to get an idea of what you all think about this plan. And Councillor Judson, I'll start with you. Is it a good plan?
Well, I think it's a great way to show leadership on a global problem, and we've started to pilot some of this initiative in Fort Frances with our bylaw, which targets a subset of those plastics with some products that we know have widely available alternatives. So I hope that decision makers and higher levels of government are watching the experience of communities like mine and the positive citizen uptake of these initiatives to craft their own agenda and to implement these regulations so that we have some consistency from coast to coast.
And in a few moments, we're going to be speaking about how you've done it. Joanne, is this a good plan?
Yeah, I think what's really important to mention here is that the bans on these particular products or packaging are actually part of a multi-pronged approach that the federal government has chosen with this regulation. So it will be supported by national recycling targets, mandatory responsibilities for the producers and manufacturers that put plastics onto the marketplace to make them more responsible for them, and plus, most importantly, a requirement that packaging and products of plastics actually contain a lot of recycled plastic material as well to increase the value. So bans as part of a multi-pronged approach is the right way to go.
And Karen, in your view, is this the good plan?
Yeah, it's very good. As a start, I think I agree with what Joanne says, that it's a start on what needs to be a much more comprehensive plan to address plastic pollution in Canada and around the world. But we're excited to see the bans finally announced, and we would like to see them implemented and put into force no later than the end of this year.
Joanne, are there any exemptions to this plan?
Yeah, I think the government is looking very carefully to make sure that that in fact there are no unintended consequences with respect to some of the alternatives that might replace. We don't want more impacts as a result of that. There is some discussions around things like straws and people with disabilities to make sure that they still have access to those. But the good thing is that industry has already demonstrated that they're prepared to innovate. There are really careful considerations of these first items that are chosen. There's a science-based criteria behind to give it rationale, and most importantly, industries are already demonstrating that they are innovating, providing consumers with alternatives to these options. So a really good first start.
Councillor Judson, Joanne mentioned that there are exemptions for people with disabilities who need straws. When you enacted the plastics ban in Fort Frances, did you make any exceptions?
We did. This was an issue that we've tried to strike a balance on. So while the bylaw prohibits the business from making those straws available by default or automatically, they're available upon request. And that's an issue we do continue to monitor, because we have had some citizen advocates who have raised this concern, and we want to make sure that we strike the right balance between making sure that all of our businesses are providing those measures of accessibility and inclusion, and that we're not alienating anyone through the bylaw. But it is something that's been top of mind here.
And Karen, allowing plastic straws for people with disabilities is one thing, but were more disabilities and the needs associated with them considered?
I mean, the federal government followed the consultation that they have been conducting for more than a year. And I think straws were the key accessibility issue that were raised. I would just like to mention that there's another major exemption in the regulation, which will allow Canadian manufacturers and plastics makers to continue exporting these harmful and unrecyclable products around the world. And we'd like to see that loophole closed. If Canada has decided that these materials are bad for the environment, we shouldn't be exporting them and dumping them elsewhere in the world.
Countries, I just want to follow up on that, because countries like Rwanda, since 2008, they've had really firm regulations in place. You can actually face jail time if you're caught with a plastic bag. In Kenya in 2017, if you're anyone selling, producing, or using plastic bags, you can face imprisonment or up to 4 years in prison and fines of up to $40,000. Obviously, we don't want to see that kind of ban in Canada. But is it maybe because we're going through a pandemic, and to enact such a harsh ban where you can't export might actually affect and impact business in a negative way? Karen?
Well, I think what we're seeing with climate and what we're seeing with plastic pollution is the need to transition away from these destructive kinds of products and practices. And so there's so much economic opportunity in things like reuse systems that would allow us to use more durable packaging and products and containers over and over and over again in what is truly a circular economy approach, and not worry so much about protecting an industry that really is going to have to transition away. That the plastics industry, the petrochemical industry, is an extension of the fossil fuel industry. And so as we in Canada and around the world wind down our reliance on fossil fuels, plastic's not going to be so cheap and cheerful and seemingly convenient as it is today. And we are going to have to transition away from that. And I think the sooner we think about that and do it fairly for the workers that are involved in that industry, the better. And there are so many job opportunities that come and job growth opportunities that come with reuse and a circular economy. Reuse, repair of products, this is what I hope that we can start thinking about, as opposed to trying to protect an industry that's on its way out.
I want to read something from Canada's National Observer, and this is from Mark Fawcett Atkinson in July of 2021. And he writes, every day, about 160 tractor trailers full of plastic waste cross the border between Canada and the United States, with about half going in each direction. They are a key link in a scrap plastic trade worth $18.8 million. But few details exist about what happens to these shipments on either side of the border. It is unclear if they're recycled, dumped in a landfill, sent overseas, or burned as fuel. Karen, a year ago, most countries, including Canada, signed the Basel Convention, which prohibits the cross-border trading of plastic waste. If that's the case, how can this still be happening?
Well, first of all, the U.S. is not signatory to the Basel Convention, unfortunately. And Canada and the U.S. have signed a deal, I think Mark referred to it there as a secretive deal, to continue cross-border trade. I mean, Joanne knows that there are legitimate plastics exports that go to legitimate recyclers. I think there's probably not enough oversight of this process. I don't think we know exactly what happens to all of the plastics that are exported. There was just a report this week, and in fact, it came out in English today, about Canadian plastic waste ending up mixed in paper waste and sent to India, where it's being burned. So we know there's a lot of plastics are not an easy material to recycle. And a lot of the flexible plastics that we use every day are, a recent report out of Canada suggests only 3% of those are recycled. And basically none of that is out of the blue box. So we really do have to rethink, A, how much plastic we're using here and what types of plastic, and B, monitor those exports to make sure that they're actually being sent to proper recycling facilities with environmentally sound recycling practices.
To hear that only 3% is being recycled, Joanne, I wanted to give you the floor since Karen mentioned you.
Yeah, sure. And just picking up on Karen's point, I think, I talked about this regulation connected to bans being part of many tools in the regulatory toolbox. And we've called for, as an organization, many times for the need to actually have better data, better tracking, better reporting, not only with respect to, the targets that Canada is about to set at a provincial level with extended producer responsibility regulations as well, but again, internationally, to make sure that we know exactly what it is that we're generating, what types of materials are part of these more aggregated shipments, where they're ended up ultimately, not just what countries they pass through, which, folks know that many or much of what we're generating in Canada is going through the US to other destinations where they just don't have the facilities or the manpower to deal with it responsibly. And so we have to make sure that better tracking and reporting protocols are in place as part of this regulatory package, so that we can have a better line of sight.
And I want to bring it back to this ban that's going to be taking place by the end of 2022. Joanne, what was the reaction of industry and plastic producers to this ban?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a recognition broadly by industry. I can't speak for any one sector or any one industry, but I can say that there's, I think, on a global level, there's a recognition that there's much more plastics produced than is ending up in the recycling system. We have this, these less than 10% of what we're generating on an annual basis and putting onto the marketplace is ending up in recycling systems. And I don't think there's anybody, regardless of whether you work for government or industry or environmental organizations, that says that that's acceptable. So, while industry knows that they'll need to adjust, that they've got to examine the kinds of products and packaging that they're putting onto the marketplace, they know that they need to be part of the end of life solutions, and they know that actually they have to maybe pivot in some cases, producing less of those kinds of plastics that can be recycled, and looking for alternatives to these things that we describe and define as single use. So the industry knows that they are part of the solution, and they're very actively at the table.
And we know we do have somebody on the panel whose municipality has gone through this. Councillor Judson, why did Fort Frances want to be the first in Ontario to take this on?
I think our council was really motivated by an opportunity to demonstrate that we can use local government, we can use municipal jurisdiction in Ontario to contribute towards larger problems in our world and across our country. And so that's the pitch that I took to council when I brought this forward, is that we have an opportunity here to demonstrate that our citizens are behind these types of changes, that our businesses, our consumers, know they need to make these changes, and we can demonstrate leadership by nudging them in the right direction. And so that was the method behind the madness that brought this forward a few years ago, and we have given it quite a bit of runway to get off the ground, to make sure everyone has time to adapt and exhaust any existing inventories. But the reception has been very positive, overwhelmingly positive, and I'm very proud of it for our community.
What's the support been like for the plan in the town?
Just an example, we recently, due to the supply chain issues during the pandemic, we had some businesses ask for a little bit more time before the penalties under the bylaw came into force. And the reason they asked was not to delay enforcement, not because they don't want to comply with the bylaw, but it's because their customers ask them uncomfortable questions when they're not complying with the bylaw. So the political will is there, and people are, I think, very enthusiastic about this, and they're very proud that our community is doing this. I buy grocery, like I go to Walmart like everyone else, and I listen to hear what people are saying, and generally it's overwhelmingly positive. I don't hear people complaining. I hear people sort of saying, more communities should be doing this. This really should be more universal. We should do more. And probably the most important thing is that because of these small changes we've made, which I admit aren't enough, they're starting to cause people to voluntarily question what other decisions they can make outside of these prescribed regulations we have at the municipal level. They're starting to think about, what other impacts am I causing that I could address by making different choices? I'm
thinking too, I hate to admit this to this panel, but people are creatures of comfort, right? You go to the store, you expect to get your plastic bag, and there's been times when I just kind of like, ooh, I just want my plastic bag. So, it's one thing to change policy, but how do you change culture to get everybody to buy in on this? And I would like to get everybody's view on this, but Councillor Judson, how did you do that?
We did it by starting off with some consultations with some of the groups that we knew might have the biggest impacts. And so I first started shopping the idea with our business community. We talked a bit about industry impact earlier on the panel, but small businesses in a community that are buying these types of products to carry out their transactions are directly impacted at the front lines. And even there was a lot of support. But once the bylaw was enacted, we leaned on our municipal administration, who've done an exceptional job reaching out to business, making sure there was educational materials that were circulated in the community. And I think one thing that's really important to note is that we are a small community. Census yesterday says we have 7,700 people who live here. And so we have an opportunity to pilot ideas like this where, frankly, it's far less work and it's a little bit easier than in larger centers because we have limited media, because there are only 3 grocery stores, and it's not nearly as much work to get these things going or to make changes if we learn something critical along the way.
Karen, it is one thing to change policy, but how do you get cultural buy-in on something like this?
Oh, I think we're there. I mean, Canadians overwhelmingly, time after time, say they want to do something about plastic pollution. And I think what's important to note, and Councillor Judson said this well, which is once the rules are in place, it also incentivizes people to think about how they live and do things differently. And so that's why even starting with a ban of 6 items nationally gets people thinking, it gets businesses thinking about how to do things differently. It gets us thinking about, okay, I really do need to bring my own bags to the grocery store. It's not hard, and what I really hope it also does is get businesses and the governments, local, provincial and national governments, thinking about how to incentivize also reuse systems that make reuse convenient. So containers at stores, containers at restaurants that we can take back easily to very accessible depots, maybe on a deposit system. They can be washed out and sold to us again, so that we're not generating these kind of piles in our blue boxes that we know, well, the majority of which cannot be recycled if it's plastic. The other materials, yes, but when it's plastic, no.
We're talking about the gains, which is a great thing, but as we know, whenever we have these shifts, there's always a cost somewhere. Joanne, in your view, who will end up bearing the cost of banning these single-use plastics?
Well, I might want to ask a different question, which is who bears the cost if we don't start dealing with plastic waste? And the Councillor Judson knows that ultimately and predominantly it is the municipal sector who has to deal with inaction. And so when they look at filling landfills and dealing with more expensive recycling programs through Blue Box, because there's such a proliferation of different types of plastics and plastics that are getting harder and harder to recycle, there is a cost to not starting to address this pollution. So, and I think we forget sometimes that that to account for that or to equate for that. So there is an accounting for change. There's no doubt. But to Karen's point, because industry is so nimble and they're so innovative, they're going to be able to fill a gap with the opportunity. So as we get out of single use and we look at more refill, more reuse, more durability, I have no doubt that industry will fill that economic opportunity. So there will be some short-term pain in the sense of, these things will have to come off production lines. But as I say, there's no doubt that industry will fill them with more economic opportunities with different kinds of products and packaging.
And Karen, what are we going to be replacing these plastics with?
Well, hopefully, ideally, in the long run, reuse. I mean, I know in the short term, companies are looking for replacements of those single-use plastics that are on the ban list. Ultimately, we can't just replace all our single-use plastics with single-use paper, glass, or metals. Plastic really dawned an era of single use after the Second World War. And it's that culture that we have to get away from, this idea that we can just use things once and then throw it away. It's not the way the world works. The planet cannot stand that. So, that's why the bans are a good opportunity to start really forcing us all to think about that and to think about how to get into more circular, durable packaging. But in the short term, we do see the likelihood that there will be probably more paper around. And the one thing I'll say about paper is it's not great for the environment to use paper once and throw it away, certainly not. But once it does end up in landfills or hopefully in composters or in the natural environment, it will break down much more safely than plastic. So, in the meantime, we will be doing our environment a big service by getting more and more of these non-recyclable plastics that end up littered in our environment out of our environment.
Is it enough? Because I mentioned earlier that in Rwanda has been doing this since 2008. That's 14 years ahead of us. Are we ignoring bigger plastic problems by turning an eye on other plastic uses and practices? Karen?
Well, I think there's a lot more to do. I mean, more than 50 groups signed on to a call this week to the federal government to do more and faster on the plastics problem. Joanne outlined some of the measures they can take, and I agree with Councillor Judson that it's great when the federal government can take a leadership role, because it does create some kind of conformity and across the country, which is helpful. But the pressure from below is also really helpful. Like, it's great to know that this has happened in Fort Frances. It's been successful. People like it. And so, yes, we need more innovations from below to figure out what we can actually do together to limit plastic proliferation and to limit plastic pollution. We have a whole laundry list of items that we hope the government does, including, as I say, incentivizing reuse and requiring reuse, and really making companies responsible for the full life cycle costs of the products they put out on the market.
Joanne, what are some of the materials producers are reverting to be able to abide by this ban?
I think, and I've had some conversations with product designers and some of the industry that's looking at, of course, different materials, fiber and paper being one of them for sure, but also looking at other bioplastics or more compostable packaging. The key there is that we have to make sure that packaging, although it may not come from fossil fuel sources in terms of its production, and it comes from more renewable sources, we have to make sure that we can get some value out of it at its end of life. And so we have to make things that are able to be taken in by our green bin programs, that are successfully can be broken down within compostable programs or composting programs that are sort of common to the municipal sector. And then ultimately looking at this refill, which really is the pinnacle to try to minimize the amount of production cycles, but also allowing us to really reduce consumption at the end of the day and production. So, I mean, I think there's different angles here, and because you're getting such a wide diversity, stir sticks, straws, and takeout containers, there's opportunity to explore all of those alternatives.
Speaking of alternatives, Councillor Judson, we're going to have to find something to replace the single plastics. Are you looking at the reduction in plastic use in Fort Frances? Are you worried that now you're creating new forms of pollution?
Well, I don't have any data on that to really support that hypothesis. I'm sure our waste management people will be keeping tabs on how this unfolds. For the most part, I think that, going back to my earlier comments, people are making more environmentally conscious decisions as a result of what's happened. So I generally think that we are seeing waste reduction across the board. We're seeing more reuse of the alternative products that they are deciding to adopt. And I also wanted to just go back to an earlier comment about how important it is to have this pressure and momentum from down below. I think too often we are looking as municipalities on federal and provincial governments to lead and solve a problem and rescue us from a predicament. And they can do that far more efficiently when we at the local level demonstrate to them that our communities want this, they like this, they're good at this, and that it's resulting in cost savings and environmental protection for the places we live.
Change can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. So I'd like to get some advice from all of you on how we can enact this ban provincially, federally. And Councillor Judson, I'd like to start with you. Any advice?
Well, it goes really to communication with the community. That's been really from the outset what we set out to do. We gave a long runway to implementing the policy, and it's been graduated over a period of time to make sure that everyone had the tools and information they needed to adapt. And we've had to make some adaptations as a result of supply chain challenges during the pandemic as well. But that's the key thing is that communication and being a partner to businesses and consumers that are trying to, in good faith, make these changes. And I think that will bear fruit for any government that wants to tackle this challenge.
And Joanne?
Yeah, just to pick up on those themes, I think this is a production and a consumption issue, and so it's going to be we're going to have a role as consumers and residents to support and participate in the change, and on the flip side of that, industry has to give us alternatives, gives us choices, keep these convenience items and the alternatives that they'll replace them with as convenient as possible. So it'll be a multi-pronged and sort of multi-stakeholder approach to making this successful.
And Karen?
Yeah, I think clear communication. I mean, this is happening. This is when it's happening. Let's get ready. And let's make sure we're making good choices. I really think that the model from Fort Frances is excellent and should be used as a case study across Canada to implement these kinds of changes.
Joanne, what's the timeline going forward with regards to Canada-wide implementation of the plastics ban?
Yeah, so the implementation is scheduled for 2022. So we're looking at really by the end of this calendar year, we'll have to be prepared to moving into the ban requirements, and then the government will simultaneously be putting out other discussion papers on other aspects of the plastic waste directive that they are moving forward.
Thank you all so much for your insights. We really do appreciate it. And Councillor Judson, well done to Fort Frances on this. We really do appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you. We're very proud of it.
That is the agenda for Thursday, February 10th, 2022. Tomorrow, some students who have come to Ontario from around the world to study are in crisis. We'll find out why. I'm Nam Kiwanuka. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.